Is there such a thing as alternate realities? Is it possible to switch into alternate realities by accident? Well, today we're exploring some pretty eerie first-hand accounts, mostly from Reddit. And some of them really do make you scratch your head. Let's get right into it. Our first story comes to us from Reddit user SadBlackCat666, who tells of the time they were introduced to their deceased great aunt. My maternal grandfather's sister passed away from cardiac issues in 2000. I was born in 2003 and was told for years growing up that this is your aunt, we'll just call her Laura here. She died from heart issues. I was able to understand the concept of death, dying from a very young age. So I understood that she passed away and that I would never meet her. Fast forward to 2014 or 15, I'm at a family function and my mom introduces me to my aunt. She explained to me, this is your Aunt Laura. I was shocked and told them both that I thought she died before I was born. She looked exactly like the woman in the pictures I was shown as a kid, so I knew it was her. They were both confused. After a bit of talking, I went back to hanging out with my cousins. However, the whole thing still spooked me for years to come. When I was 18, I asked my mom if she remembered this incident. She had no clue what I was talking about and still has no clue. She just doesn't remember a damn thing about what happened. I'm in my early 20s now and I'm still confused about the whole ordeal. I sometimes wonder if I slipped into a parallel universe where my great aunt was still alive in the mid-2010s. Striped Macaron posted about her incredibly harrowing near-death experience on Reddit. She'd been 25 years old at the time, driving home from work one night in Los Angeles on a curvy section of road on Sunset Boulevard. Suddenly a car spun out of control in front of her, blocking her lane with no time to halt. With another car beside her, options were limited. She instinctively swerved right then left to avoid collision. Then she felt a surreal flashback to a trip she'd taken with her mother to Disney World. She'd only remembered vague parts of the trip, but this particular memory wasn't one of them. This is when she was convinced her life was flashing before her eyes and that she was going to die. She screamed, "No, this isn't fair, not yet," as she swerved all over Sunset Boulevard. But then she just stopped and suddenly found herself alone on the road, as if everything had been wiped clean. She drove back home and didn't see a single car the entire way. Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was eerily deserted. She reached home and parked the car, still no one in sight. Once inside, she called a friend asking her to confirm that she really was alive, just to ground herself back into reality. She was convinced she might be in a limbo state after death. She finishes by saying, "There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my own existence. I've wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard." The next story comes from Reddit user Cold Old Duck. I was picking up my mom and driving towards the same intersection I always went through. Lights were green. All of a sudden in my head, I felt and heard a split second of pure dread. Someone running the red and hitting me broadside right in the driver's side door. I could feel the crash, being crushed, the pain, the blackness, and it was instantly gone, just left with the dread and terror. I braked hard and slowed to an almost crawl stop at the intersection despite the green light, and a car came flying through the red at high speed a second or two later. Never knew why or how I knew, but it was terrifying. I felt like a cat who had escaped with one life less. Reddit user MaterialWolf8005 brings us this next story entitled, "I died and woke up in a parallel universe." I have sleep apnea, and sometimes if I sleep facing up, I will wake up gasping for air and choking on my saliva. Anyway, I was so tired I slept facing up. I remember waking up freaking out and gasping for air. As I looked to the ceiling, my vision started going black from all angles into a single point. Think of how an old TV turns off. After that, I was staring at myself through a mirror I have facing my bed. I remember thinking, "Oh no, I'm dead," as I looked at myself lying down. Then I saw myself moving as if I was waking up. I woke up But the craziest part is that as soon as I woke up, I saw myself in the mirror staring at me, but standing up, not laying down. Now this world feels off. I was anxious and depressed, and all of a sudden I'm fine. I feel like I died in a parallel universe and woke up in this one. It's so weird. I can't explain it, but I feel different. This next story is pretty trippy. It comes from Peyton Lay 0616, who seemed to have watched a monster truck completely vanish right in front of their house. They write, "This happened not too long ago. I was standing on my porch watching my kids play in the front yard. Our street has a crossroad intersection at the end, and I could see it from where I was. As I was watching my two kids, I noticed a big black truck, the kind that has floodlights at the top and bars in front of the grill, pulling up to the intersection from the left road. I saw a bald man driving and two other guys in the bed of the truck, and on the sides were two different flags. One looked like a French flag, I believe, and the other I had never seen before. They looked like they were celebrating, and I remember wondering if maybe their team had won a soccer game or something, because it looked like they were being loud. But the thing was absolutely silent, and I could see them whooping and hollering and chanting. Anyway, they turned down my street, coming towards me. I kept my eyes on them because they were intriguing me. I watched them turn down my street, start coming my way. Now, here's the tricky part. My neighbor had a big SUV in their driveway that blocked off my vision from part of the road, and once that truck, those two flags, and three celebrating men reached the part of the road obstructed by my view of the SUV, they never came back out. I even walked down into my yard to see if maybe they'd pulled into the grass of another neighboring house, but nothing. They just vanished behind the neighbor's car. Always awkward running into someone who recognizes you and you just can't remember their name, or worse, can't remember them at all. This story from Open Temperature 6440 kind of takes that to a different level. It goes as follows. This happened back in like 2014. I went to Walgreens a few blocks from my house at night to buy a few items. While I was there, this guy down the aisle from me started talking to me like he knew me, but I didn't know him. Never seen him before in my life. He asked me how things are going and asked if I was still working for Joe. Joe was the name of my boss that I worked for a while when I was in college. I told him no, I wasn't still working for Joe because I'd graduated and gotten a full-time job. I was so confused and asked how he knew me. He seemed surprised that I didn't remember him and said that he was Joe's son, which is weird because the Joe I worked for didn't have a son, just two daughters. He could tell I was confused and asked if I was okay, and I replied that I was fine, but I didn't remember him. He was still shocked that I didn't know him. Eventually, the conversation ended, and I went on my way. A few months later, I ran into my old boss, Joe, and I told him I ran into someone that said he was his son, and asked just to make sure he didn't have a son. He said, nope. Not that I know of. I still don't know what to make of that encounter, but it was bizarre to say the least. My theory is that I somehow entered an alternate universe or reality, but I don't know. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Who knows? The following is a story from DSLY4425, who writes about a possible glitch in the Matrix. I remember writing a term paper in college about a specific disease and disease process that still exists to this day, and the treatment at the time, specifically that at the time there was no medication available on the market to treat it, although there was a lot of research being done. Fast forward 15 years, and I was debating with my pharmacist, who was also my boss, how long a medication for said disease was on the market, and we got curious and looked it up. In this dimension, the medication has been on market since the late 90s, which would have been high school for me. I definitely wouldn't have written my paper on the subject or gotten a high score on it, for that matter, if the medication really was on the market in the late 90s, as the paper was written in 2003 at the earliest. And I wrote the paper on that specific disease and process as I was working with patients directly impacted by it at the time, and I had taken a good deal of extra training in my field of work, specifically with those patients, so I kind of knew my stuff and where research was heading, which at the time was developing the drugs that are now on the market, but none were out. Following story comes to us from Wolfie is Back in Black. who was in high school when this happened, living in the same neighborhood she lives in now in Mumbai. The area hadn't undergone much development back then, with dense vegetation covering what is now occupied by buildings. The Redditor was very familiar with the area, having spent her teenage years exploring its nooks and crannies with her then boyfriend. One day, they were lost in conversation and wandered towards the end of the road. Without paying attention, they turned right and accidentally walked into the last building on the lane, and what they found was very strange. In total contrast to the well-maintained surroundings, this particular building was dilapidated, like it had been bombed and set on fire. It had an eerie silence about it, devoid of the usual signs of life. No birds, no insects, nothing. There was moss growing in places and chunks of concrete had fallen off. They had never seen the building before and hastily left, joking about the place looking like a haunted apartment. Well, 2 weeks later, she found herself in the same lane with her cousin, and lo and behold, that dystopian-looking building had completely transformed. It was painted in vibrant colors, flowers bloomed in pots, and there was vegetation surrounding it that would have taken months to grow. She approached a guard who was stationed nearby and asked him if the building had been recently renovated, and he looked at her like she was crazy and just said, no. From Reddit user Star884, we have the blue truck. The story goes as follows. My mother and I were on our way to a funeral. We stopped by the corner gas station to grab drinks on the way. I was in the passenger seat, my mom was driving. She turns around, not moving, but the car is in gear, to where I thought she was backing out of the spot. I always look in the mirrors when anyone is reversing, just a natural habit. So thinking she's backing out, I was like, whoa, wait, there's someone coming. I saw a pretty big light blue truck coming very fast behind us. My mom says, cool, I see it, and stops. All of a sudden, there is another car coming pretty fast on the complete opposite side. The freaking blue truck disappeared though, just gone. It had nowhere to go. We were all literally about to crash all three cars. Somehow, it was gone. So my mom and I both saw the big light blue truck coming. We either had something happen or we had a shared delusion. And finally, we have a strange story from Reddit user London Mama 2019 who had a very strange experience in a graveyard. Probably the last place you'd want to have a strange experience in. I had taken my 6-year-old for a walk to the playground. We just moved houses, so didn't know the area well. So I checked my Apple Maps to see if there was a quicker way home, as my little one was starting to complain a bit. The quickest way was through a graveyard. We started walking and the birds were singing. It was quite sunny, perfectly normal. As we walked further though, the atmosphere just changed. It's really hard to explain, but it felt completely flat. No birds, no people, just a really oppressive feeling. We also noticed that some things looked not quite right, like gravestones facing in different directions. I'd never seen this before and it was bizarre. Some were in rows, some sideways, some facing the opposite direction, and there was a huge pile of dirt against the side of the little church. I didn't want to scare my daughter, so kept chatting. Then she seemed to notice it too and said, "This is horrible, I don't like it here." I checked my map and it had gone crazy. It was directing us the opposite way and kept changing and moving around. I followed the path round, and as the main street came into view, everything seemed to go back to normal. Birds, people, traffic sounds, even the sun seemed to get brighter. When we got home, we talked about it. I told my husband, my daughter called it the creepy graveyard. The following week we went back to show my husband, but it was like a different place, no weird vibes at all. It was very peaceful but completely normal, and we couldn't find the gravestones facing different ways. I read a book last week about time slips, and the way it felt was described by a few people who had experienced time slips. So now I'm wondering if this could be what happened to us. With all that said, folks, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.